Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Before entering into the subject of meditation, we should make clear to ourselves what kind of meditation we are speaking about. For there are meditations and meditations. Meditations need not be always of the spiritual type. In a broad sense, meditation is the dwelling of the mind on any theme. It can be the problem of mathematics, a problem in a physics laboratory, a military problem. It can be an artist dwelling upon an emerging theme of his painting. These are also meditations. In America, you are familiar also with new brands of meditations which are more or less relaxational exercises. They neither contribute to the evolution of consciousness nor unveil the peace of the spirit within oneself. They give, at any rate, they claim to give a certain relief from the day-to-day tensions of modern life in order to increase the efficiency. Here also there is the utilitarian approach, which is very foreign to the concept of meditation. Speaking for ourselves, we confine our discussion to meditation as an aid to spiritual life. Meditation is a must. Whatever the type of spiritual life, meditation is a process that is indispensable. I spoke of types of spiritual life. Indeed, there are. Broadly, spiritual life is a way of life where one shifts the center of reference, center of activity from the external ego standpoint, desire standpoint, and shifts it soulward, spiritward. Whether the spirit, the higher consciousness, is conceived within oneself, deep and deeper in the inner layers of the being, or above the mind, or around oneself. It indicates a shift of consciousness. Every discipline that promotes this shift, this transfer of active preoccupation from the outer to the inner, from the lower to the higher, that broadly is spiritual life. Spiritual life is the life of the spirit. Spirit is the truth of life. Everything has a truth of its own, the truth that forms its backbone, and that is the spirit. The spirit is to be distinguished from spirits. Spirits are many, but spirit is one. And this spirit is indestructible. It is all pervading, boundless, infinite, but it chooses to embody itself in finite forms to support the movement of forms from within. That is also what is called the right. What is truth in movement becomes the right. The essential truth of a thing, when it moves into action, it becomes the ordered truth of active being. And spiritual life consists in becoming aware of the existence of this unchanging, ever supporting, ever expanding, ever growing core of the spirit in ourselves. And meditation is a discipline which we practice to accustom ourselves to withdraw our preoccupations from 100 outer concerns in which we are normally lost, and become aware of another layer of being, another level of consciousness which is behind, which is above these external movements. In the very nature of things, this requires an attitude. It requires a background. It is not something like a gymnastic exercise that one can come away from normal duties, suspend them, get into the gymnasium and perform muscle building exercises, tennis, badminton and so on. It is something that requires a background, that requires a framework, and that is what is called the general attitude, the spirit of life that governs one's day-to-day existence. Meditations are not something different, apart from one's day-to-day life. Meditations are special periods, peak periods if you like, of an inwardly orientated life. And that means one has to have an outlook, and based upon that outlook, an in-look and an uplook, consistent with what one seeks. Because the type of meditation depends also on the ideal which one seeks. What is it that we seek to realize in spiritual life? Personal salvation, escape from birth and death, transition into a beyond, which is described as either a featureless non-existence or an indescribable bliss, or is your object something more rational, something more noble, to fulfill the object of life in life, not outside of it. Add the concern, the social concern, the concern for the environment, to your own. Recognize that you are a unit in this universe, which is not different essentially from yourself, from God whom you seek. In a memorable sentence, Sri Aurobindo says, "Reject not the universe, O lover of God, for thou wilt find that this universe is only the body of thy God." It is in that perspective that one takes to spiritual life as a means of enlarging one's consciousness, spreading oneself out, fulfilling the Creator's intention. The intention of the Creator is not that all of us are brought up, given facilities, given opportunities, brought up by this careful, exacting Mother Nature down the millenniums, only so that when we become self-conscious, we may cancel ourselves from the list of cosmic existence. The intention is something more, to manifest the glory of God. And God is a word. God is a word designed by man to denote that glory of the Supreme. Plenary splendor of knowledge, infinite consciousness, absolute irresistible power, unending bliss, and immortality, an eternity and infinity. Now all these are conceptions, not imaginations of man. Man's first dreams, ever since he awoke to thought, are also the last dreams. They are this passioning for light, for bliss, for immortality. When any idea, when any thought rules the human mind for ages, coming back from its banishment now and then, asserting itself, we must be sure that there is a truth behind them which claims fulfillment. And a positive spirituality, a kind of spiritual life which embraces the whole life, enlivens it, enlightens it, elevates it in a growing measure, dynamic way. That is the spiritual life that we have in mind. And there is no escape from it, because that is the demand of the time spirit. World shunning spiritual life, ascetic disciplines, they were all tried by nature as experiments, aberrations, permitted deviations. But today, all over the world, including the lands where negative spirituality throve, there is a massive awakening, looking towards the world, accepting the challenge of the world, and reforming one's spiritual approach towards transformation of human nature into a divine nature, establishing the kingdom of God on earth. Now, with this perspective, let us approach meditation. Meditation is a temporary withdrawal of our mind, our consciousness, in order to train that consciousness, to train that mind, to dwell exclusively upon a chosen theme. Peace, calm, love, purity, all these, they are essential. No spiritual realization is ever going to be possible unless some of these bases are laid down. And in meditation, we think on these themes, try to breathe them, try to establish them, try to examine ourselves, and work on ourselves. Now, this cannot be an isolated exercise. The pattern of life must be so fashioned, general life, day-to-day life has to be so fashioned that it promotes this particular exercise of meditation. If the rest of the day is given to wayward movements, irrelevant movements, meditation can never be successful or meaningful. So we have to have a general outlook governed by certain spiritual principles. Dig those principles in our day-to-day life before we can hope to have fruitful meditational exercises. And what kind of attitude one must have, what kind of outer life one must shape to promote this meditation? This question has been examined by a number of psychologists, spiritual psychologists, and one of the master psychologists of the East, who first systematized the floating traditions of yoga, he has given a scheme which I consider to be the most satisfying, most comprehensive, which, whether one belongs to the East or the West, one has to practice. I deplore that this emphasis on a preliminary moral and psychological purification has been missing from most of the presentations of yoga or meditations that have been placed before the public in the West by Eastern exponents. I have searched and searched, but nowhere is this emphasis given that one has to purify oneself morally and psychologically before one can step into spiritual life. That the others have not laid emphasis, sufficient emphasis, is no reason why we should follow them. We mean business. We mean to realize something great, something serious. And for this purpose, there is a set of 5 negative rules and 5 positive recommendations. First, one must accept the truth of non-injury. In Sanskrit, it is called ahimsa. Now, non-injury has been usually translated as non-injury to animals. Now, it is the most crude interpretation that could be given. Non-injury, non-violence is an attitude, a requirement which covers the whole being of man. Physical abstention from violence is not difficult. It is difficult for some indeed, but it is not difficult for a spiritual seeker. What is required is abstention from violence in the mind, in the heart, in the life impulses. A single thought of ill will, of anger, of hostility creates a lot of damage. It goes like a messenger of poison, spreads the poison in the atmosphere. And if it is strong enough, thank God, with most of the people it is not that strong, it reaches the objective. That's the law of thought. But usually what happens is, man is normally weak as a mental being. His thoughts crisscross with other people's thoughts and they get neutralized. Whatever that may be, but in oneself there is a vitiation of consciousness. It acts like a poison, a drop of poison in the psychological system, and creates certain grooves into which future and further movements of consciousness tend to run. Violence in thought, violence of feeling, a feeling of vengeance, a feeling of hatred. These are most unspiritual movements which pollute the system and render it unfit for the breathing of the higher spirit. We don't speak of violence in action, that is out of question. But even these, for instance, what is called a violence of the soul. There are instances of moralists, those who preen themselves on their virtue, on their self-righteous perfection, and they want to impose their will upon another person. And this attempt to impose one's will on another against his wish through any means of coercion, subtler grows, is 100 times more violent in the subtle sphere than the physical violence. So on all accounts, violence has to be shunned. It has to be put out of court in one's scheme of life. And the true test that one has eliminated violence from one's being is that traditionally hostile elements forget their hostility in the presence of one from whom violence has been eliminated. If you are one who have no violence in the mind, even a tiger, a leopard, when it comes before you, it is not going to harm you. It yields, it respects. Now this is an ideal to be achieved, but it is a must. One has to start somewhere from where one is. In many of our legends in the East, there are references how when the king goes on hunting and it is dark and he can't get back to his capital, he looks for a hermit, he looks for a place where he can have in the evening some spiritual enlightenment. And his people search for a possible hermitage where there is a wise man, and they spy a place, a cottage, where a deer and a tiger cub are lying together. And then they say, that must be the place of a spiritual seer. And they go. This is not tradition, simple convention, superstition, but it is a fact. Even today in India, you will find places where animals, birds, reptiles, we forget their conventional and traditional hostility. and play together in the presence of one from whom all violence has been eliminated. This is the first requirement. The second is truth. We are inclined to treat the normal maxim, tell the truth, don't speak falsehood, as a moral maxim. But as a matter of fact, there is a great spiritual verity behind it. Truth, not merely in speech, but in thought, in feeling, in action, is very important. Because the spirit which we want to realize, the Supreme God whom we want to realize, is truth. His nature is truth. And unless we are wedded to truth in every bit of our life, how can we hope to realize Him or that reality, which is another name for truth? If we permit falsehoods, inexactitudes to creep through our lips, how can we hope to be the messengers of truth? It is a must that we must respect truth, regard truth, and practice truth. For a serious practitioner of truth, a lie is something ignoble. A falsehood is something unimaginable. He doesn't speak untruth, he doesn't speak falsehood, not because he would be punished for it somewhere else, but because it is beneath human dignity to do so. Animals do not lie, angels do not lie. It is only given to man with his pervert mind to tell lies, to speak falsehood. It is an error, a deviation caused by what is called the desire self. One has to have a standard of truth. Each one knows what is truth. I won't ask with the pilot what is truth and without waiting for the answer pass. No. Everyone who is sincere knows what is truth. An intellectual definition of truth is not necessary. A feeling, an intuitive perception that this is true, one has it. Even the most primitive man knows what is truth. And according to his understanding of truth, standard of truth, he must form his day-to-day life. This is very important. And there is an occult tradition which I have seen again and again being verified in life, that one who speaks the truth always, he has that gift that whatever he speaks comes true. Whatever a truthful man speaks comes to be true, however improbable it may look at that time. Because he has spoken, the words carry that power, that dynamism, and the words effectuate themselves. This is the importance. A spiritual seeker does not practice speaking the truth in order that whatever he says may come true. No. But it is a fact that it is so. He tells the truth because it is the demand of his soul. A nobility of his soul demands that he speaks the truth, takes the right royal road of truth. There is only one way of truth, but there are 100 ways of falsehood and lies. It is not difficult to follow the truth, but it is easy to get oneself lost in the ways and byways of falsehood. This is the second requirement. truth in speech also. To make truth in speech possible, a lot of preparation is necessary. A truthful thinking, thinking along the lines of truth, feeling along the lines of truth thought, and acting, trying to act along that line. Only when that background is done, created, one normally, effortlessly, spontaneously speaks the truth. And a word of truth has an impact, a self-realizing and a self-effectuating impact. Nobody would dare question the veracity of a word from one who normally speaks the truth. A spiritual seeker must cultivate this habit, not only himself, but introduce this habit in his environment, in his home, among his people, so that truth dwells in that atmosphere. And third is conservation of sex energy. Now, sex is a question which has been covered with so many clouds, misunderstandings, superstitions, conventional falsehoods, taboos, that it is time we take a straight look at it. Sex plays a considerable part in the life of a human being. It is a legitimate part of nature, life. It will not do to shut our eyes to the existence of sex. It will not do also to say that if you want to do spiritual life, you must banish sex, which is as absurd as saying that you can reach God through sex. Both are 100% false. The conservation of energy is demanded on the part of a spiritual seeker because his object is something more than fulfilling a worldly objective, which is to have children, have progeny, earn money, have what are called the good things of life. Sex has an unrestricted role play in that scheme of life. But for a spiritual seeker, he is asked to conserve his sex energies. He is not asked in all circumstances to observe continence, because the spiritual seers have common sense enough to know the pull of sex on the human system. Celibacy, continence, these are empty phrases. Sexual discipline has different connotations to different people in different stages of life. It means one thing in the days when one is studies to the student. It means another when one is a householder. It means a third thing when one is semi-retired, becomes an elder of society. It means quite another thing when one is a super-social man, a man who is above society, but who owns his debt to society by working for it. There are stages in the life of man, and according to the station one occupies is the meaning of sexual discipline for him. Now, why discipline at all? There is sexual energy. Like other energies in the body, it will have its own fulfillment. Why bother? A question may be asked. There is a reason. In each human body, male or female, there are sexual fluids sexual energies. They are growing. Let us compare it to something like water. Now, as things grow, when it reaches a certain point as the body comes of age, it is full. The usual way of nature is to spill it out and use it for its own purpose of perpetuation of the species. Now, a seeker is told, if you can conserve that instead of spending it out, look what happens. What happens is, as it accumulates, there is a certain heat that is generated in the system. And with this heat, what is called tapas, the willpower gets strengthened. Man is able to exercise his will in a more effective manner than before. He is able to assert himself in his environment, fulfill his intentions, because he has that bubbling energy and that dynamic willpower. Conserve still further. The heat converts itself into light. Tapas becomes tejas, and there is an illumination of the brain. The memory power, the power of brain coordination and assimilation, that increases 100-fold. And there is a scintillation in the brain. You go still further with your exercise of conservation, even though for an experiment, both heat and light turn into electricity, an inner electricity, vidyat, by which you can conceive, you can plan, you can understand, you can cognize, you can fulfill yourself in a superhuman manner. Still further, if you conserve, you are able to do that. This energy converts itself into what is called ojas, that is, that primal energy of ether, of a kind that has created this universe, which gives a certain creative power to create things which were not existing before. Now, this is the rationale. I don't go further. It's not relevant to our purpose. Why? People are asked to conserve sexual energy. But this is a counsel of perfection. It is understood that not everyone can follow it, but everyone must have this science, this rationale, why it is asked to be done. Not because anything is sinful or sinless. Sex is no sin. It is a fundamental law of spiritual life that there is no sin. There is nothing like sin. There is strength, there is weakness, but nothing like sin. So let us divorce the idea of sin completely from sex. It is an energy. It is a power. How you are going to utilize it? So, for those who are preparing themselves for spiritual life, here is a scheme, here is a rationale of what they are expected to do or advised to do. But it is understood that it is a graded discipline. So, a regulated sex, a controlled sex is enjoined upon an average and a normal man. Indiscriminate sex is what is frowned upon in spiritual life. Sex is not tabooed, but indiscriminate sex is tabooed. Not because again there is any sin, but because it makes one a field for chaotic vibrations. All kinds of chaotic vibrations take possession of one who is given to these practices, which make it impossible for him to concentrate, make it impossible for him to shift his consciousness inward or upward. He lives in a world of chaos. It is for that purpose indiscriminate sex is prohibited. And for one who is sincere about his spiritual quest, about what he wants to achieve, sex is never a problem. Sex ceases to have relevance when one is seized with that intensity of seeking, when one tastes that bliss of the soul, of the nearness of God. The joy of sex pales into insignificance and just palls. The classical simile is like a dry fruit, it withers. One doesn't have to make a special effort. The pity of it is an undue emphasis, an obsession has developed as far as sex is concerned in spiritual life. It should be put into its proportion, not magnified, never allowed to become a problem, ignored, and whether negatively or positively, there should be no overindulgence, that is all. A kind of balance, a balanced, healthy attitude to sex is all that is required for a spiritual seeker, for one who wants to practice meditation. I think we shall resume the discussion after a break. I have been asked whether I will be speaking on the practice of meditation. Naturally I will. In fact, that will form the pièce de résistance. But we have to prepare for it, and the authorities have thoughtfully provided for full 4 hours for this discussion. And I think we can go to the climax at a leisurely pace, and then you will also have ample time to put questions, stimulate me to further thought and the expression of experience. Now, I was speaking of the preparation for the right background for meditation. The 4th requirement is non-possession. Non-possession, non-appropriation, not so much in a physical sense, but in a psychological sense. It is declared that all this is for habitation by the Lord. Isha vasyamidam sarvam. And then it follows, do not covet what belongs to others. Not only do not hold, but do not even covet. And then the text says, by that abandoned, enjoy. One can enjoy when one does not really possess. To have a sense of possession always brings a sense of apprehension that one may lose it. One must recognize that all this belongs to God. I have no personal possession, claim over anything. What comes to me, it comes as a gift from God. And in that spirit, one uses, one enjoys what comes. But what is taken away, one lets it go with an equal smile. Now this attitude of non-attachment to material things, non-sense of acquirement of material things, is necessary. And the fifth is non-acceptance of loaded gifts. It is a matter of give and take in social life, to be giving presents, gifts, receiving them. But a spiritual seeker has to be discriminate in accepting presents. He has to regard the purpose, the intention that is behind the gift, behind the present. Because once you accept a gift, you become obligated to the spirit behind the gift, and you share in it. And to that extent, you are a part of the consciousness, the attitude of the person who gives the gift. I don't need to go into details on this topic, except to say that the principle involved is to keep yourself detached, not involved in other people's calculations, so that you are free to function. We don't have to compromise at every step in life. Because somebody has done good for you, has given a gift for you, you have to consider his interests. To be able to be uncompromising, it is a necessity that one does not accept loaded gifts. That is, the next set of requirements, more positive, is contentment. Contentment. One must learn to be content with what one has, with what one is given. It does not mean that one shall not strive to improve one's lot, improve one's prospects. What it means is that one shall not have that fevered excitement, agitation to always do better than one's neighbor. This participation in tension, never satisfied with what one has, but always striving and trying to get more and more. This leads ultimately not only to tension, but to a certain frustration. Because human desire is, as is described in other connection, a pilgrimage without goal. It will never be satisfied. The more you have, the more you want. And it is to prevent this exploitation of oneself by the need to do always better than somebody else. Contentment. Whatever is you have got, accept it as the will of God. Learn to be content with it. If more comes, accept it with equal contentment. If that goes, also allow it to go with equal contentment. Contentment is an attitude which is the insight. It does not depend upon what you have or what you do not have. This independence of outer circumstances, a relative self-satisfaction, self-contentment with what one has, gives a very good start to spiritual life. Next is what is called cleanliness. Cleanliness in spiritual life is not an external cleanliness, keeping hygienically pure, taking bath. These are not considered essentially to be very steps for spiritual cleanliness. The cleanliness is one of the inner health of food. And when we speak of food, it is more a psychological food than physical food. Physical food is important, but it is not to be overrated. It is true that a particular kind of food promotes spiritual purity, spiritual sensitivity, spiritual transparency. There is a kind of gross food which increases the materiality of temperament and acts as a drag. But it is also true that the role of physical food can be overdone, can be overstated. What is required is a healthy balance in the food that we take. No doubt, vegetarian food is good, healthy, not only for spiritual reasons, but even for reasons of respecting the economy of nature. Nature, in a revolutionary course, fashions and builds many types of life. But it is a law of life that life feeds upon life. Every life depends upon assimilation of another life. So the wise rule is to take in as less an evolved form of life as possible. If you take in higher evolved forms of life, to that extent you interfere with the economy of nature. What nature builds so painfully and carefully at a higher level, that by killing it you interfere with the economy of nature. That is why they speak of vegetarian food as not only natural but healthful and in keeping with the intention of universal nature. Whenever there are conferences of vegetarians, it is always a matter of joke with non-vegetarians to say that even plants have life, you are eating life. But yes, but it is a lower form of life, a less evolved form of life, and it is less destructive of nature's economy. As far as spiritual life is concerned, after a lot of experimentation, observation, we have found that by and large, the food to which one is normally accustomed, that can continue. Though if one is prepared to adjust, grosser foods like beef, they dull the system. They make this consciousness more dense and interfere with the elasticity of the being, receptivity of consciousness to subtler vibrations. It is also true that an animal, it is not just its flesh that you are eating, but the various emotions, rudimentary thoughts that course through it at the time of its being killed. They also enter into your system through the food. We have known instances where people have suddenly felt sudden movements of anger, vengeance, all of a sudden. People were not accustomed to have such movements. And it was traced that they had eaten certain animal food. And when the animals were being killed, they had that spirit of anger against the persons who were killing it. that spirit of resentment, and that does communicate itself to the flesh. It is another matter to say that one can digest it. But if you analyze not only the flesh, the material part of the food, but even the psychological content of the food enters into you and vitiates the system. So from that point of view, it is wise to abstain from animal food. But if the system is accustomed to animal food, the less gross the animal food, the better it is. And in our scriptures, like the Gita, they have made distinctions of three types of food. The absolute, the tamasic food, the food that promotes idleness, lethargy, sleep, that is stale food, or food with too much of oil in it. There is what is called a rajasic food, a dynamic type of food with lot of spices, which stimulate the energies, stimulate the passions, and set a man afire. There is another food, a balanced type of food, fresh, succulent, moderate in taste, that promotes spiritual serenity. Now this is as far as the physical food is concerned. But more important is the psychological food. In one of our Upanishads, there is a memorable passage where he says, by purity of food is attained the purity of the psychological stuff. By purity of the psychological stuff is attained memory. By memory, the knots are loosened. And when the knots are loosened, man crosses beyond death. Now, explaining this significant passage, it is pointed out that it is not physical food, but the psychological intake, the thoughts, the passion, the emotions, the feelings that one harbors, that one dwells upon, they are the real food. They it is which determine the temperament and the direction of the evolution of consciousness. So when that inner food is pure, kept pure, there is the purity of the psychological being. And when the psychological being is pure, there is the rise of memory. Memory of what? Memory of the self. Memory of the divine self within us. And when that lost memory of the divine self comes to the front, there is an automatic loosening of the knots, psychological knots that tie one to nature. As a result of thousands of years of evolution in nature, we have teguments of the soul, knots around the soul, which are not easy to loosen. The ascetics want to cut the knots, cut off from the world, cut off from the knots. But a far-speaking spiritualist always insists upon untying the knots patiently, carefully. One analyzes, scrutinizes, and then unties the knots. And when these knots are untied, the self, the soul, the self is free. And one crosses into a consciousness that is immortal. That is as far as cleanliness is concerned. Third is ascesis. Ascesis is the gathering of our energies, of our faculties for one purpose, Normally, our mental faculties, emotional movements, life impulses are spread out in 100 directions. And we just live along. We are more lived than we live. An aspirant must gather all these threads of energy, threads of consciousness, and learn to devote himself to a concentrated purpose. This is called discipline. Without discipline, you can achieve nothing in life. Whatever the profession, whatever the field of activity, there has to be a gathered and concentrated pouring of energies, and that is called tapas. This collection of energies, systematically, utilization of energies for a destined or a particular end, that is called the inner discipline of ascesis. Ascesis does not mean austerity, does not mean punishment of the body, denial of food to the body, denial of sleep, imposition of various difficult postures, punishments on the body, but summoning of all the energies and utilization of them in a concentrated purpose, regulated way for the end that we have in view. And fourth is study. We have to study. For everything in life, we are required to study, to read, to learn. Much more so it is in matters of the spirit. It is a new line, a new province, a new realm of concerns, and one is required to enter into this realm of recorded wisdom. People of different approaches, different climes, how they have approached this problem of life, quest of the reality, what they have done, what they have proposed, what is relevant to us, what has no relevance to us. All these one must equip oneself. This intellectual and mental equipment is indispensable. One has to have a broad mind. There is nothing in matters of knowledge as my knowledge and my religion, my wisdom. Knowledge is universal. Wisdom is universal. What we have to find is what pertains to me. What part of it, what level of it is relevant to me. And I choose that and apply that to myself. That does not mean that the same thing should apply to others. Each one is in a different state of development, and each one has got to choose that part of knowledge which is relevant to him, with which he has affinity, and practice. This assiduous poring over knowledge, books of knowledge, records of wisdom and experience is necessary. Study of philosophy may not be necessary, as far as philosophy is a mental speculation. But when it is a record or a presentation of spiritual experience, then it ceases to be philosophy. It becomes a manual of practice. And one has to read it, acclimatize oneself to those vibrations, make that climate of spiritual thought, spiritual wisdom natural to one. A part of the day must be devoted to this gathering of spiritual food. Most of us, I have met many who say they have no time. But everybody has time and makes time to take physical food, material food. But when it concerns spiritual food, they are not that keen, they are not that particular. But for a seeker, it is indispensable to devote some time of the day to study of literature, to study of books of wisdom of spiritual nature. And last is surrender to God. This conception of surrender has evoked many problems and opposition from the Western mind. In the East, we are all familiar and it runs in our race blood to surrender ourselves to God. But in the West, as a rule, there are many exceptions. Individualism has been promoted as a creed. As from the childhood, individualism has been built. And for them, when you ask them to surrender, they feel it is something like death, a thing which they cherish so keenly. How can we give up and lay ourselves at the disposal of something else? But here, the difficulty comes because you conceive of God or the higher power to which you are asked to surrender yourself as something outside you. You are not asked to surrender to something outside you, but to something within yourself, to your own higher nature. Normally, we all function within the bounds of lower nature, governed by desire motive. But we have also a higher nature which transcends this ego line, which breathes the pure air of the spirit. Now it is to that one has to submit oneself. One recognizes that as long as one functions in the belt of lower nature, one cannot solve the problem. One can only turn it round and round. But one has to link oneself with something higher. My own higher self, my own higher consciousness. And this recognition of my inability to go beyond a certain line at the lower level and submitting myself to a help from above or from within and be guided is called surrender. And surrender is not a passive exercise. By surrendering, one does not surrender one's initiative. There is what is called a dynamic surrender. A dynamic surrender is you keep your initiative alive, only you shift its allegiance to something higher, to something more true. Always you keep vigilant and don't allow it to be flooded by the lower impulses, but always turn towards the higher. This eternal vigilance, constant spirit of scrutiny, adjustment, that is called dynamic surrender. Dynamic surrender is only a name for a process by which you shift your level of activity to something higher, beyond your lower desire self. Now these are the requirements, the preliminary requirements which one has to weave into the pattern of day-to-day life. These things cannot be done in a day. It is not also that one has to wait for all these things to be done before one can start meditation. But this is the background. The more it becomes ready, the more it is woven, the more fruitful becomes the exercise of meditation. And the first real step for meditation is the posture. The posture that you take. In Sanskrit, the postures are called asanas. There is a huge science around this subject, giving various postures, combinations of postures to promote meditation, concentration. Is not any posture enough? You may ask. It is not. If you observe anyone sitting normally, you will see that there is always some movement of restlessness in the body. There is a certain balance struck between each body and the life energy that flows into it. As that energy changes, the body also undergoes certain modifications. The hands may move, the legs may move. There is some restlessness. The science of postures aims at arresting this restlessness in the physical body, teaching it to be stationary, immobile, and enhancing its capacity to receive more and more of life energy or any kind of energy. There is a great power in immobility of the body, which we don't realize. When the body is made to sit, and it can sit without movement for a certain length of time, a certain force is generated within the body, and that develops into endurance, capacity of resistance, and the body becomes like a stone. There are various exercises, postures that are developed systematically, considering each limb of the body, which people practice in order to train the physical system to be the solid base for the spiritual edifice that is to be erected upon it. The physical body is looked upon as a foundation for spiritual achievement. A sick body, an unsteady body, can never be a base or a foundation for a healthy spiritual life, much less for a successful meditation. The body is to be trained to hold itself in certain stationary pose as long as it is required to do it. I think we will continue the subject after we meet after the break, after 2 o'clock. Thank you.